Hard-Boiled Finland presents Watershed Country. Written by Ville Marjonen. 2019. Part 1. I arrived in Watershed on June 15. Almost 10 years had passed since the last time. I didn't know if anyone was waiting for me, but I could rest assured that people would be startled by me and turn their faces away when they saw me again. It wouldn't bother me anymore. I had learned to play with bad cards. The afternoon sun glowed high above the edge of the forest and wouldn't go much lower until the middle of the night. I recognized lichen-covered birch trees next to a bend in the road and turned the car off the dusty highway. The car crawled slowly along the grassy driveway that curved in front of the red-boarded house. I gently opened the door and, instantly, the smell of tall grass blooming in the yard struck me like war gas after the hours spent on the highway. When I got my breath back, I took a look at the house. It had stayed in fairly good condition, even if the white paint had begun to crack on the window frames here and there. The trees and farm buildings stood in their old places among the grass, but the people were missing for good. Swallows made their attacks under the eaves of the house and back into the air over and over again. The birds had built a lot more nests since I left home. The front door squeaked in the same mournful way as before when I opened it. It was dim and cool in the interior room, despite the heat outside. I had always liked the chilliness of the room. It took a few moments before I distinguished the light switch on the wall. The lamp came on, and I stared at it, stunned, like a squirrel who spots the biggest cone of a spruce tree. The power should have been off since last fall. I opened the inner door and stepped into the main room flooded with a yellowish afternoon light coming in from the tall windows. There was shimmering dust and a familiar smell in the air. I wondered how long the smell of home would last in a deserted house after the people had left it. It must be a terribly long time. Useless objects hung on the walls that had once meant so much. The wildfowl paintings. The ugly landscape plate depicting the village church. The moose antlers hanging above the door. And 2 old shotguns with leather straps on the antlers. I lightly touched the gun barrels. My fingers were stained by sticky dust. Nobody had used the guns for a while. The calendar on the wall was dated to the previous year, 1958. I glanced at a wall clock that had stopped and showed the wrong time, but I didn't turn it on. The clock had struck its bells enough for me. I opted to check the pantry. I pulled the doors wide open and found another surprise. The pantry was full of empty, factory-new glass bottles. I wondered why bottles were stored in a way that was against all the good manners of Watershed people. I didn't get far with my reasoning when a creak sounded from the porch stairs. The door shuddered open and a blond man, about 35 years old, stormed in. He was slender, tan, and his pants were girt high above his waist over a plaid shirt. His sleeves were rolled up halfway, and the dirt on his arms revealed that he'd come straight from outdoor chores. The man looked from the open pantry to me, astonishment overwhelming his face. I recognized him as Aho, also known as Lucky. He had aged well and retained his lively gestures. Once he'd been a man I'd looked at as a friend. "Ville, is it you, really?" Lucky asked, brushing his blonde hair, as if he had seen a ghost. I nodded and stepped in to shake his hand. "Wow, it's you indeed. Well, for God's sake." Lucky cried and patted me on the shoulder several times. Then he took a step back and measured me, carefully, from head to toe. "You look the same as before," Lucky continued. "A bit more robust and tanner, but that's all. When did you arrive?" "I just got here," I replied. "And what about that Buick in the yard, is it yours? An absolutely amazing car. Is it brand new? Did you ship it from America with you?" Lucky said in a quick burst of questions and pointed at the window like a restless auctioneer. "It's this year's model." I wondered if your house was rented out to the people coming to the party convention when I noticed nice wheels in the yard. "Why didn't you write that you were coming? Are you gonna stay longer this time, Ville?" "Well, we'll see. I came here to take care of some things." Lucky nodded. Then he brushed his hair again and turned serious. But then again, you didn't come to your old man's funeral last fall. People were waiting for you here then, you know. No, I didn't make it. But, you now. Tell me what's going on in Watershed. Has everyone else stayed alive? I made a friendly gesture toward the table. Lucky sat down across from me and started to tell me about things that had happened in Watershed. He spoke quickly and, at times, gestured wildly, as he used to do in old times. My father's funeral had been a simple ceremony. The blessing had taken place in the cemetery with a small crowd. Lucky said my sister had taken care of funeral arrangements with honor, without crying too much. The funeral was attended by a few relatives, neighbors, and old women who always wore black and attended all the funerals that took place in the village. Apart from the brief blessing given by the priest, no other speeches were given. A local newspaper published a short news about my father's death and the pathetic cause of it. A drunk falling to death from an esker surrounded by the rocks. That was all. My sister had returned to town and my old home was deserted for the winter. Lucky said he had been looking in on the place to check that everything was okay. Other things were mostly as before in Watershed. The biggest change was the dam construction, started by the power company, with the aim of building an artificial reservoir on the Leerkoinen lowlands. Lucky complained the river had dried up almost completely due to the dam construction and fishing didn't work out. "How's Maria doing?" I asked, breaking the silence that had fallen after Lucky paused his lengthy account. Maria was Lucky's sister, whom I had last seen 10 years ago like everyone else in Watershed. I gazed out the window, indifferently, so that I wouldn't look too curious or meddlesome about his sister's affairs. "What about her? She still lives at home and goes to work at Layla's bar. Has she found anyone?" "Nope. She's become an old maid 'cause nothing is good enough. There have been those suitors, but she's too choosy, you know." "Has Maria mentioned anything about me?" "Everyone was talking about your leaving at the time, you know. I don't think you're on Maria's good side either, after leaving like that. She hasn't mentioned anything about you for a long time." "But, my good man, ask Maria herself, now that you're here." "Maybe I will. By the way, how did you happen to stop by right now?" "How? I saw the Buick in the yard. I thought who on earth has come to your house with such nice wheels? We haven't seen American wheels like that here before, you know. You can't see the car from the road." Lucky's eyes wandered above me for a fraction of a second. He was still a poor liar. "I saw the tire tracks in the grass first, then came here to take a closer look." "Let's go outside," I said and got up. Before we walked out, I slammed the doors of the pantry so that the empty bottles rattled against one another inside the closet. The cuffs of my shirt had gotten dirty from the gray dust on the table. I tried to shake it off, but the dust was stubbornly sticky. In the yard, Lucky lit a cigarette right away. He blew a gray cloud of smoke into a bright summer evening, glanced at the forest, and raised his hand with the cigarette, like he always did when beginning to explain his thoughts. "There's a shitload of jackrabbits here. You should shoot them all day long to stop the rabbit fever coming. Luckily, there have been few mosquitoes this year. It's been so damn dry. Look how dry this grass has become. How about going hunting the jackrabbits one day in the Takakungas Heath? I mean, when you've settled down." "Well, I wouldn't care to pick up a gun around here." "Oh yeah, that thing? Well, nobody remembers it anymore. Or wants to remember it, anyway." I remember. I remembered the weapons cache case very well. 3 long weeks on a straw mat in jail doing my time. Interrogations at night. The trial. And the look on people's faces afterward when I was set free, contrary to their expectations. "Yeah, well, they did some dirty tricks to you, for sure," Lucky said. Suddenly, his face lit up and he pushed gently on my arm. "Well, tell me now." He raised his voice. "Tell me what you managed to do in America. After all, damn it, we've got only a handful of postcards from you all this time, and the cards were always 2 months late." "I'd rather talk about the bottles," I replied. "Those empty glass bottles inside the pantry. Inside the house. Lucky glanced at me sharply. He sucked his cigarette bright and then dropped it under his shoe, putting it out. Before he had time to make up explanations, I cut to the chase. You didn't come here by chance today. Did you? What's going on? Well, frankly, I came here for business, Lucky said after a moment. We have a soup going in the old gravel pit of Hirtala. We bottle here, cause the house is empty and no one ever comes out here. You can't be too careful with the snitches, you know. Let's go see the pit, I said, pointing at the edge of the forest, in the direction between the stable and the shed. For a while, Lucky was in two minds, like a deer in the headlights, as to whether he should show me the gravel pit or not. Then he shrugged indifferently and took long strides through the grass toward the forest. I had hard work to keep pace with him when the grass turned into a heath forest where we followed a winding path in silence, as men do when following a trail in succession. Occasionally, I stepped on the gray-green lichen lining the path. It crumbled under my shoes, with a crackle. The blueberry shrubs had turned yellow. From everything I could see, the drought had lasted for quite some time. After walking a little less than a mile, we crossed a low ridge and arrived at the spot. The place was well chosen because the distance to the nearest house or road in each direction was at least as long as what we had just passed. And the river was not far away. The gravel pit had not been used for years and the road to it was barely noticeable as it had become forested long ago. There was a dense young pine forest at the bottom of the pit. It provided a protective wooden curtain against any snitches that might show up by chance. Lucky jumped down the steep slopes of the pit like an expert. He glanced at me with pride in his eyes and invited me to follow him down into this exclusive arena of the woods whose shows were restricted to a small and carefully selected audience. Down in the middle of the trees, an ash-covered and stone-lined fire pit poked out. It was surrounded by a miscellaneous collection of tin barrels, buckets, and scoops, a neatly stacked woodpile, and a blackened moonshine still, with two metal tubes sticking out of the lid through a wooden water tank. I stepped over to the fire pit and touched a stone with my palm. The stone was still warm. Lucky pointed to a tin barrel. That batch has been clarified once and at least 5 gallons of damn good stuff will come from it after you run it through twice more. Who's involved? I asked. The Leno brothers. They can do this job better than anybody else around here. I'm just watching the fire at night. And what do you get out of this? Lucky laughed. I'll get nothing. I'll pay off my old debts. You're still playing? Yeah. And your name hasn't brought you any luck? Well, no, it hasn't. It never has. I stared into Lucky's eyes to find out how badly in debt he was to the Leno brothers, but he quickly dodged my gaze. He turned to the barrel and stirred it with a long-handled wooden spoon. By tomorrow morning, get these out of here, I said. Lucky stopped stirring and looked at me in disbelief, like a regular who gets banned all of a sudden. What? By tomorrow morning, all gone? Come on, man. It's gonna take 2 more nights. We don't have anywhere else to go. It doesn't matter. This place is on our land and you will remove these by tomorrow morning. If not, I'll throw them in the river. I have other things to take care of here than this. Lucky froze and stared at the murky surface of the distillate in the barrel. We used to cook with your old man till last year, he said quietly. I don't know what the Leno brothers will think of this when they hear about it. Your old man was probably in debt to them in terms of booze, you know. My old man lies under 10 feet of gravel. He no longer owes anybody anything. I didn't stay to listen to Lucky's reply, but turned to retrace the path we had come together. I heard Lucky shouting my name, but I kept climbing up from the gravel pit without turning back. I grabbed a fist-sized stone from the slope. Once in the forest, I threw it at a tree trunk. And cursed. By the house, I headed for the well in front of the shed, before anything else. I threw a chain zinc bucket into the well, lifted it up, and checked the surface of the water. The drought had not affected the color or smell of the water. I washed my hands and raised the bucket to my lips. The water tasted just like I remembered it, with a bit of iron. I retrieved my foodstuffs and suitcase from the car and moved them into the house. After fetching drinking water from the well, I tested the stove to see if it would draft. I felt draft on my hand and started the fire. My dinner was simple: bread, butter, and corned beef. Beside the empty glass bottles, all I had found in the pantry was a salt jar, an almost empty coffee can, and a fistful of sugar cubes. Food and coffee gave me strength, and I decided to check the bedroom. There were only mattresses on the beds, as my sister had taken all the pillows and other beddings along with her to town, as she was supposed to do. I opened the top drawer of the dresser and found a silver frame turned upside down. I turned it around. It was a picture of my mother. It's been a long time, I thought. I put the frame back with care and closed the drawer. Back in the main room, I dropped my watch onto the table, swept the dust off the fabric couch as best as I could, and lay down. I was more tired than I had ever been. I didn't know how long I had been asleep or half asleep when the rattle of an engine woke me. The noise got louder and louder. I limped off the couch. A small blue car curved into the yard and stopped in front of the house. I didn't recognize the car brand, but it had been made in Russia, for sure. Cars like that weren't manufactured anywhere else. That didn't take long, I thought. I tucked my shirt inside my pants, swept my hair back, and stepped onto the porch. Before walking out the door, I grabbed an iron-handled scythe and a whetstone from the porch closet. It was still bright and warm outside, but the light had a reddish hue now. The blue car was parked behind my Buick. 3 men sat in the car, who I reckoned to be the Leno brothers. The car's engine shut down, and, without warning, there was complete silence. I couldn't even hear leaves rustling in trees. Then I heard a clunk. The eldest of the brothers, Rummy, got out of the car. He was the biggest and had the worst temper of them all. Next, Old P, a fast little man, climbed out from the back seat. The youngest of the brothers, Seppo, stayed behind the wheel. I wouldn't have recognized him if I had met him anywhere else. Seppo had been so young last time I'd seen him. The brothers' brown-gray hair was parted on one side with hair oil. Rummy and Old P were dressed in loose-fitting dark blue jackets, and it was impossible to see whether a bottle, a knife, or other weapon was hidden under their clothes. It was easy to see Rummy and Old P were on a bender, however. Their eyes and the ruptured blood vessels under their stubble told me that heavy drinking had lasted for many days and nights. "Hiya, Ville, hiya," Rummy said and grabbed my hand. We shook. "Ville, my man, take a welcome sip. Listen, man, now we have real good stuff here," Rummy continued and drew a glass bottle from his pocket. The bottle was identical to ones I had seen in the fully loaded pantry inside the house. I refused to grab Rummy's bottle. "What the heck? Isn't Village Production good enough anymore?" Rummy asked. "This stuff is clarified 4 times, my man." "I didn't come here to get drunk." "Oh, but you will. Every man has time to get drunk this time of summer." "I have some business to take care of." Yeah. It was too bad that your old man passed away like that. Listen, he was good one, even if he left a little debt behind him. Well, my man, it's tough luck that you lost your mother first, then your brother got killed in the war, and then your father walked into death like that." I turned the scythe upside down. I spat on the whetstone and started to sharpen the scythe blade with slow rotating hand movements. "My man, you're not gonna scythe it this time, are you? Just leave it for the morning," Rummy proposed. "Let's get inside and have a nice chat now. A lot's happened since the last time." Old P joined the conversation. "You brought a nice car with you. We haven't seen such a nice car around here before, I must admit. The black paint shines like the top of a grand piano." The youngest of the brothers, Seppo, who had been picked for driving in accordance with his position, didn't take part in discussion, but kept sitting quietly behind the wheel. He looked from his brothers to me with barely hidden unease. "No time to chat now," I said. "There's so much to do tomorrow that I have to get on scything now." Rummy pinched his lips together and dug a pack of cigarettes out of his front pocket. "Want a cigarette, Ville?" I quit smoking. Well, there's a man for you. Doesn't drink or smoke. I guess you have some small sins left, though? I didn't reply. Rummy and P lit their cigarettes and leaned against the car. The heads of their cigarettes glowed red in the summer evening twilight. Finally, Rummy said what I'd been expecting. So, you came and spoiled a good moonshine hideout then, huh? I spat on the whetstone again and kept sharpening the side with slow rotating motions. I smiled a little, which I shouldn't have done if I had wanted that evening to end peacefully. Rummy rubbed his chin, and, from the corner of my eye, I saw P sucking on his cigarette with hollow cheeks. I didn't pay attention to them, but directed my words to the youngest of the brothers, sitting shyly in the car. "Howdy, Seppo," I called out. "Giving lifts to drunks, are you? Is it really worth doing now that you're all grown up, with a beard, and everything?" Seppo didn't reply. He turned his gaze to the center of the steering wheel, as if he had something important to look at. "We cooked with your old man many times in the Hirtala pit," Rummy said. "You can't find a place like that anywhere nearby. Now listen to me, man. Your old man passed away owning us a little bit. We'd call it quits if you let us cook there in peace this summer." I didn't say anything to Rummy, but kept calling out to Seppo. "If you have a driver's license, Seppo, why not go to town and get a better job? At least they pay some money for driving drunks home there." The center of the steering wheel seemed to have captured all of Seppo's attention, leaving him unable to take his eyes off it. The middle of the brothers, P, crushed the cigarette under his shoe and spoke up. "Ville, damn it, you think you're too good to answer our questions?" I stopped grinding the side and put the whetstone into my pocket. I took a step towards the brothers' car, but then I felt pain in my right leg and my steps became heavy. Rummy put his cigarette away. Seeing me limping, he gloated. "Something wrong with your leg? What the fuck is it?" I tested the scythe blade over my tip of the thumb, where it left a thin red line. I picked up the scythe with a wide grip and cut the grass with 2 quick pulls right beside the brothers' car. Rummy and P jumped aside, cursing heavily. Then they got caught up studying the short, straight grass in front of the car and a thin scratch on the side of the tire left by the scythe. "Now, you can get in the car with 2 feet," I said. P began to search his jacket pocket for something, but, instantly, Rummy blocked his way by grabbing him by the arm. "Leave it. Let's get out of here, goddammit," Rummy ordered, pushed P into the car and following him shortly after. Seppo, who had stayed on the driver's seat, didn't understand the reason for the quick getaway, and the car didn't start until Rummy had nudged Seppo's arm twice with his fist. The car backed out to the highway along its own tracks. I heard Rummy cursing from the open window. I couldn't assess the quality of the curse because of the car's rattling, even if the target of the curse was easy to guess. The red taillights disappeared from view on the highway, and soon the nerve-wracking rattling of the small blue car faded away. It was completely still again. Even the birds had decided it was no use keep singing at this time. I rolled up my sleeves and started scything the grass. I took it easy at first, then pulled the scythe faster and faster. Finally, I swung the blade fiercely back and forth all the way to the lone spruce tree by the roadside. My clothes had gotten wet. I went to the well, took off my shirt and splashed some water on my face. I sipped the iron-flavored water. Then I looked at the scythe leaning against the well and thought that my old man had taken good care of it and the dry grass was easy to cut. I, however, still couldn't sharpen the scythe well. A childhood memory came to my mind. It was summertime and my dad had taken us for a swim in Lake Pyhäjärvi after a day's work. My mum had died a year earlier. It was a warm day and the pine trees smelled wonderful. Shoals of perch sparkled with gold below the surface when I watched them in the shallow water. My big brother and sister swam into the deep water where I wasn't allowed to go yet. It bugged me. Dad noticed me standing still in the water while the other kids giggled and played far from the beach. "Grab my neck," he said and lifted me on his back. We swam into deep water together. How excited I was on my father's back. Look where I am," I shouted to the others. That summer never seemed to come to an end. Now the path from the well to the house was grown over. My father was dead, so was my brother. My sister was living her own life in town. There was just me left, and I didn't have what it took to sharpen the scythe. My eyes grew wet. Maybe it was the hay dust. I flushed them with water again. I went inside and sat in a rocking chair in the middle of the main room. I tried to stay awake in case the Leno brothers came back to negotiate unfinished business that night, but I failed and fell asleep. I startled awake. In my nightmare, a bear had been chewing something meticulously, and I realized, to my horror and disgust, that it was my own leg. While I'd been asleep, my neck had stiffened and my right leg hurt badly. I tried to find the old scar on it, but my whole leg was numb. I waited for the pain to settle and went out of the house. It wasn't morning yet, but the birds had started their long day job, nevertheless. The yard was as peaceful as the Garden of Eden the day before the fall, so I decided to go and check the gravel pit of Hirtala. At the bottom of the pit, I was amazed to see it had been cleared. Even the woodpile had been carried away for better use. Only the ash-covered fire pit and sooty stones indicated the business conducted there. When I got out of the pit, 2 young jackrabbits stared at me in wonder from the other side. "This is not the year of the hare, far from it," I called out to the long ears and moved on. Back at the house, I spotted fresh foot tracks in the grass. They started from the main door and led to the right side of the house. I followed the tracks. Someone had walked around the house and looked in through the windows while I'd been away. I locked the door tight from the inside. I wouldn't get a big sleep or any other sleep for the rest of the night.